You might be looking at this thinking that the mistake is actually the ugly garden. Ugly gardens, I can live with that because it's just a garden in transition. I decided to expand the garden and move it to another part of our yard, and through that process, somehow, even with experience, I made some pretty obvious common garden mistakes. So that's what we're going to talk about here, or common gardening mistakes that maybe you can avoid whenever you're building up your raised bed or any vegetable garden. So I decided that I wanted to expand and move my garden from another part of the yard. I have a dog that likes to dig everything up, and so we've closed it off. I've got a fence over here, and eventually this garden will look nice. But the ugly really isn't a problem. So mistake number one was not preparing for the weather right. I live in Texas, and so we had that weather storm Uri, and I know you northerners just have a lot to say about that, but our weather and when we plant, it works the way it works, right? And we didn't cover much of anything. So we did protect our apple trees, only a little bit. We didn't do as much as we probably should have had we known what was actually going to come down. And we didn't cover any of the plants in the garden. I had rosemary that had been doing well, parsley, and just some other herbs. I had some lettuce and spinach in the ground, and everything above ground pretty much just didn't make it. So all of the vegetables and things that I planted, I actually ended up with one head of lettuce and then one spinach plant. Everything else died. A palm tree up front, I know it's not a vegetable garden, but that one definitely didn't make it. And surprisingly, our apple trees made it. We really thought that they were going to be a goner based on how they looked after the storm. But we did cover them, but we didn't cover them as well as we should have. Next time, definitely prepare. Another mistake I've made already with this expansion is I decided to plant things that I've never planted before. And so I've got some potato plants right here. I just let some potatoes that I had sprout, and then I put them in the ground. And what I discovered was that you should actually be hilling them as you go, so that way the stems produce the potatoes too. I'm out of room. This thing, I just didn't plant them well so that I can hill them up. Anything else that I hill is gonna fall out of my garden. So I should probably have done more research before I throw unknown plants into the ground. I just kind of took it for granted. I've been gardening for years, and I just threw them in the ground, and we'll see what happens when I can harvest. Another mistake that I made was not observing the area where I was putting my garden. We've lived here for years, and this is an unused side of the yard, and so it just felt like a natural expansion place for the garden. At the end of last summer, we went ahead and started building these beds, planted things. It's fine. But over the winter, this whole section of the bed doesn't get sunlight. And if I had just observed, like rule number one for permaculture is observe, I could have prevented that. But now I know and I understand how the garden works, but I had to find out through things not really thriving over on this side of the garden based on how the sun goes throughout the day. So definitely know the sun before you set up an entire raised bed system. Another thing I wish I had done differently is planning my irrigation a little bit better. I was a little willy-nilly in how I just kind of threw it out here because this is done in stages and still being done in stages. But if I had thought through it a little bit better, I wouldn't have to reroute it, and I am having to do that. And I try not to spend any more than like 15 minutes a day out in the garden because, I've got the mom thing, the family thing, and work. I don't get an opportunity to spend a lot of time out here, but now I've got to actually do a bunch of rework because I didn't take the time to plan. I know as we expand, I'm going to have to do some more things, and I expect that, but I also already have a plan for this space, so I should kind of have a plan for my irrigation so I don't have to rerun things. And my biggest mistake that I've made so far is I took it for granted, a rule of thumb I've known about easement. So the edge of the property, I've always been told, don't build anything within 3 feet of a property line, which is not a problem. And so that's what we did. And then we came home one day to fiber internet being installed in our front yard. And that got me looking into our survey, and it's actually not a 3-foot easement where we've got my garden, it's 5. And it's actually 10 feet in the front yard, and that was a complete surprise. So we basically built this raised bed system with utility easement issues. So we do have lines that run through here, and if there's ever an issue, they're gonna come dig it up. So that was probably the biggest mistake that I caution you against, is kind of understanding the lines that you have to work with, so that way you don't end up with a destroyed garden down the line. And so while I'm not an expert gardener, I have been doing it off and on for years. It's just one of those things I like to pop seeds in the ground at the right time of year and see how things pan out. I don't spend a lot of time out here, but I still love it, and I still get great enjoyment by actually eating the things that we grow at the house. So while I'm not supporting our entire family on what I grow, I'm all about trying to learn to make it quick, efficient, and approachable. So watch this next video if you're interested in the same kind of gardening approach.